Tom. Anybody know who this guy is over here? But I want to say before we get started that I think it's fitting that we've heard some of these great things about the things that happen in our city that make Fresno special, that make Fresno unique, that remind people that, you know, Fresno is not a backwater town somewhere. This is a place where really good things happen, where people who believe, who have a dream, who follow God's call in their life can really lead and see incredible things happen in our community. And Coach, I'm not buttering you up, but I've seen that since you've been here. This guy came to this town and reached out to just about everybody. He reached out to Coach Sweeney's players, to Coach Hill's players, to the community, and did it in a sincere way. And maybe most impressively to his players, that at that point he hadn't recruited any of them. And the way that you've been able to engage and become part of this community, even though you're from the LA area, we've forgiven you for that because you're one of ours now. But thank you for being so sincere and genuine and becoming a part of this community.
God, I mean, that's kind of touching. I didn't know you were going to be this nice to me today. You got some harder questions coming up, don't you?
You know, we could talk football all day, and I'm sure you get tired of all the football questions I ask you, but I'm sure a lot of these folks in here would be interested to hear about your childhood, the family that you grew up in, and kind of the way your life began to take shape. Can you take us back there to all those fights with your brothers and getting pounded into the ground and all that?
Well, fortunately, I was at the top end of the family. I'm one of 8 children. My dad is actually from Holland. His family came over when he was, I believe, 9 years old after the war. And he was one of 13. My grandfather was a dairy farmer in Hilversum, Holland. Yeah.
The Shahadis are clapping.
Thanks, Richard. And most of my uncles went into the family business. They started dairies in Southern California and have since moved all over the country. My dad, I believe, was number 10 out of the 13. He went into the retail end of things. And anybody hear of drive-in dairies? I know Rich probably has. My dad had a pasteurization plant and a drive-in dairy. That when I was a little kid, I used to go work for my dad. You know, someone drive up, give me a gallon of milk, local bread, dozen eggs, and I'd run, go get it, bring them up, and get them out the door. So I learned early on how to, you know, add things up, and I was pretty good at math. And I was one of the bigger kids as well, being number 2 of 8. I was very fortunate that my parents believed very strongly in Catholic education. Our entire family went to 12 years of Catholic school. So it wasn't much of a change for me when I went to the Air Force Academy. I was used to wearing a uniform and being yelled at and hit, so you know, that part wasn't real difficult, but was very fortunate to be around some special people growing up. And I look at the leaders that were in my life. Obviously my parents, you know, initially, but then as I went to go into high school, I got a great relationship with my former high school football coach, and saw what an effect he had on all of us as players. And I thought, you know what, that's a pretty special calling, you know, to get a chance to call yourself coach. And I love that idea, but I had pretty good grades growing up. And my mom would ask me, okay, Tim, you know, you got SAT scores that are up here, and you can go anywhere you want to go to school. I was recruited by Harvard and Princeton and the Air Force Academy. She says, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I said, well, when I get done playing football in the NFL, I want to be a football coach. Because, you know, I had all the answers back then. And she says, no, you're too smart for that. You know, you want to be a doctor, a lawyer, or whatever. I said, oh, I kind of want to be a football coach. But I ended up going to the Air Force Academy primarily because of football.
But that isn't where you wanted to go. Why don't you tell everybody what your dream school was coming out of high school?
Well, they probably don't want to hear that here because there's probably a few USC grads here. But I grew up in Southern California watching Pat Hayden and John McKay and Anthony Davis. And, you know, I thought, you know, Pat Hayden and John McKay, they were guys from, I think they went to Pius X High School, or under, where did they go? One of those schools out there. But anyways, yeah, that's it. I'm sorry, Bishop of Mott. They went to, I think Pius X is the feeder school into it. But they went to Bishop of Mott, and I went to St. John Bosco, and I thought, hey, that's a place I'd love to be. A great tradition, but those sorry sons of guns never recruited me. So,
isn't it funny how God always has better plans for us than we have for ourselves? And the other thing maybe people don't realize, you know, you talk about wanting to be a football coach, but your life was actually heading in a different direction when you got out of the academy. You weren't destined to be a football coach at that point, at least not in the near term.
No, it is funny how things go. When you graduate from the Air Force Academy, you incur a 5-year active duty commitment. My first year, I was fortunate enough, they allow you for one of those years to be a graduate assistant football coach. So there was a handful of my teammates that got to stick around for another year, and that was 1985, and was there for a terrific year. We were 12-1 at the academy. We just beat Notre Dame for the 4th straight year. We beat Texas in the Bluebonnet Bowl, and we finished 5th in the country at a service academy. And this was in 1948. This was back in 1985.
Hey, watch it now. We've got some folks in here who are alive in 1948.
No, what I'm saying
maybe in college in 1948.
No, but back then, the Army was terrific.
Army, Navy.
Yeah, they were terrific. So my players disagree, but I say it's the modern era that happened at. But went through that year. After that year, you know, again, I had that coaching bug. I wanted to coach, and so when I left, I told the coaches on staff if there's ever a chance, I'd love to come back. And in the meantime, I didn't get a chance to go to pilot training. I had bad eyes, and I was a business major at the academy. So they sent me to Boston to Electronic Systems Division at Hanscom Air Force Base, and I worked as a contract negotiator for 3 years. And my thought was, you know, get out of the Air Force and probably go into government service or work for the enemy, the Hewlett-Packards and the Raytheons of the world that were building things for the government. They paid a lot more than what the government was paying. But with 1 year left of my commitment, Fisher DeBerry was the head football coach at this point at the Air Force Academy. And Coach DeBerry was an assistant who had recruited me. He called me and says, "Hey, Tim, I've got an opening for a military coach. Would you be interested?" And I thought, hey, I can always work for a living. I can't coach football all the time. So I said, sure, well, come on back. And Kara and I packed up from Boston, and we moved out like 2 weeks later to Colorado Springs. We spent the next 4 years on active duty as a captain, as a football coach, and had a terrific run. We went to 4 straight bowl games. Again, just solidified in my mind that coaching matters and I want to do this. But unfortunately, those military assignments are 4 years. And they said, can't coach anymore. You're either taking another military assignment or you have to put in your paperwork and get out. And I said, okay, let's roll the dice. Let's try to get out and get a football coaching job. But nobody left the staff there. And we had just had our son, Jake, excuse me, our first one. And Kara said, okay, it's time to grow up and get a real job. And so got out of coaching and got hired by a company who dealt with a bunch of service academy graduates. And I actually went into medical sales for 2 years. And I was in operating rooms 4 or 5 times a week, in scrubs with a laser pointer and my little kit of titanium plates and screws, talking to oral maxillofacial surgeons, plastic surgeons, and neurosurgeons about, you know, people that have plates in their faces and plates in their skulls. Kind of scary that they let people like me, football coach, in surgery with. I didn't want to scare everybody here this morning, but that's the reality of it.
I'm just imagining, you know, the typical coaching exhortations that we might overhear at one of your practices being yelled in an OR somewhere. But in all seriousness, when you got to that point, here you just told us you're married, you have your first child, and all of a sudden everything you've been doing, everything you love, everything you know is coming to an end. That had to be a pretty difficult personal time for you. What was it that maybe encouraged you or got you through that time and maybe kept you believing that this was going to work out?
Well, I had great faith that no matter where that path was going to lead, God was going to provide something for me that I was going to have success in. And I knew having Kara by my side that we were going to be able to, you know, work through whatever difficulties were going to be there. She had great faith in me. When we were married, I was in Boston, so I went back to Southern California. We got married. She moved to Boston with me. That was a little bit of a rough patch, just, you know, moving out of the house for the first time across the country. But then moved to Colorado, and then the next adventure was going to be Pittsburgh, and she said, "Giddy up, let's go."
Well, and as God had the plan, you weren't in those operating rooms forever. All of a sudden, football came back to the picture. You had let it go, and God kind of brought it back to you. Tell us how that happened.
Yeah, I was 2 years into my job in medical sales, and I can still remember to this day, I had Western New York and Western Pennsylvania was my territory. My wife and I lived in Pittsburgh. I had a terrific job. My boss lived actually in New York, so I would only see him 3 times a year.
That sounds like a great job, doesn't it? Sorry, we got a lot of bosses in the room. Better be careful. All right, go ahead.
But this was in November back in would have been 94. And Jim Grobe, who was my position coach at the Air Force Academy, called me up out of the blue. And this is back in the days where I had a bag phone. Anybody remember those big old bag phones? Our players have no idea what the heck I'm talking about. But I'm in my car and phone comes ringing, and it's Jim Grobe, and he says, DeRuyter, he says, last time we talked, you said you want to be a football coach. I said, absolutely. He says, well, I'm a finalist for the job at Ohio University. If I get the job, do you want to be my defensive coordinator? And I had to make a really quick decision, because I'm thinking in my head, okay, Coach Grobe is the linebackers coach at the Air Force Academy. He's not a coordinator. He's a really sharp coach, and I think at some point he's probably going to get a coaching job, but there's no way in the world he's getting this job. If I tell him no, I'll never get a call back. So I'll just tell him yes, because he's not getting this job, and I'll still be in his good graces. So, of course, I tell him, Grobe, you get the job I'm in. Don't worry about it. We're going to go attack this thing. We're getting it. I don't even tell Kara when I get home, because in my mind, there's no way he's getting this job. Well, sure enough, 2 weeks later, he calls again and says, hey, DeRuyter, I got the job. Then I had to have the tough conversation with Kara.
Yeah, God always has better plans, and he has a sense of humor.
Yeah.
How did that conversation go with your lovely bride?
It was a little bit tough. I said, look, I haven't committed to anything, but, we've got an opportunity to go down to Ohio University and get back into coaching. And at this point, we were doing pretty well in medical sales, and the pay was going to be about a third of what I was making. We had just built a house in Pittsburgh, and in fact, we had just spent, 20 grand in landscaping, and she just put curtains up, and oh, by the way, we just had Christina, our second, and she's looking at me like I have 3 eyes, but she says, well, if it's something that you want to do, and she knew Coach Grobe. She says, I believe in Grobe. He says, well, let's drive down there and talk about it. And this is back before the internet. So I had no idea where Athens, Ohio was, what kind of football program they had, nothing. Through a conversation with Coach Grobe, though, he kind of informed me why he was the lone candidate. They had 23 straight losing seasons. They currently had the nation's longest losing streak. In fact, the last game of the year before, they were 0-10. Akron, Ohio was 0-10. They lost that game in what the media dubbed the toilet bowl. And it was a tough situation. But we decided to get in the car and drive on down to Athens, which is about a 3-hour drive from Pittsburgh. And about 45 miles outside of Pittsburgh, you go into a little 2-lane highway to get to this little college town in Athens, Ohio. It's one of those places you got to be going there to get there. It's just not in the middle of main part of Ohio. Well, I'm anxious to get there, so I'm going a little fast, and state troopers welcome me. So pull over, kids are crying, license registration. He looks at it and says, Pittsburgh. He says, son, what are you doing around these parts? And I explained to him that a good friend of mine, Jim Grobe, just got the head coaching job at Ohio University, and I'm here to talk to him about being a defense coordinator. And this is no BS. He hands me the license registration back and says, son, you've got enough problems ahead of you. Slow down. Needless to say, Kara wasn't real fired up.
Isn't that great? I mean, doesn't this sound like Hoosiers or something like that? I mean, it's like a movie script. Well, and I guess if you're going to set it up that way, you've got to tell us about the success that you had in Ohio and how that winded its way to you getting your first head coaching job here.
Well, I'll tell you, you talk about leadership. We've got great leaders here in this town, You know, and I happen to work for a great one here as well, and thanks for letting me know that Dr. Cantor is here.
I wasn't sure if you recognized him.
But I'll tell you, I asked Jim, you know, Coach Grove, I said, Coach, I see what's happened here the last 23 years. What makes us think we can win here? And he says, well, I'll tell you what, tomorrow afternoon we've got lunch with the president of the university. Brand new president, Dr. Glidden. He just got here from Florida State. He's been here a couple of months now, and he let the previous staff go. He wants to have lunch with us. I thought, you know what, if the president of the school wants to meet with me as a potential defensive coordinator, maybe it's going to be important to him. But having that drive that said, you know what, athletics is important. It's never going to be the sole reason, obviously, of a university, but it can obviously be the front porch as well. And a lot of times, especially in today's day with media, it's the first, you know, impression that people get for your school is through athletics programs. Had a great conversation with him and felt great that we were going to have a chance to win. Well, that first year in our second game, we played a 1AA team. We lost our opening game at Iowa State. So we still had the nation's longest losing streak, but we beat Illinois State in our second game, and our students, this is how sad it was, they actually tore the goalpost down for beating a 1AA team and no longer having the nation's longest losing streak. We get through that season, we win another game, and we tie one, we're 2-8-1. We started 11 freshmen. That next year we came back, we were 6-6. We beat Hawaii out at Hawaii. Had a nice win out there. And then that following year we went 8-3 and played Marshall in the championship game out in Huntington and lost to a pretty good Marshall team that had Chad Pennington was their quarterback, and a guy named Randy Moss was a pretty good receiver for him. But we had taken that team that had no hope, brought a bunch of young guys in and gave them hope and gave them some inspiration and had great leadership at the top, and we got it done.
And you got it done at all your other stops as well. He ended up going back to the Air Force Academy, then to Texas A&M, and we got him from Texas A&M after he was the defensive coordinator there. And then you come into this job, your first head coaching job. And I imagine family-wise, maybe it wasn't as crazy as having the two toddlers and taking this Ohio job, but you've got one son in college, a daughter about to go into her senior year of high school, which I'm sure all you parents of teenagers know that's a pretty volatile time too. And then you're taking over a program in a community like this where everybody cares about the Bulldogs. So what do you remember about those early days here in Fresno and how you approached that challenge?
Well, going back to the decision to come here, it was difficult because we'd just been in Texas for 2 years at A&M. My daughter loved it there, but she
Where does she go to school now, by the way?
She's an Aggie right now.
She's at Texas A&M, yeah.
In moving her, going into her senior year, weighed heavily on me. In fact, 2 years prior when we left the Air Force Academy, my son was coming up on his senior year. And when I was offered the job by Coach Sherman, I told him, I said, look, Coach, this is a terrific opportunity, but I got to talk to my family about it because I can't take this job if they're not all in. And luckily, my son played high school football in Colorado Springs. And when I talked to him, I said, Jake, I said, I know this is going to be tough on you, but I was offered the job at Texas A&M. What do you think about maybe going, to Texas for your senior year? And he looked at me and says, are you kidding me, Dad? Texas A&M? I'm in. And so had a great reaction, and Christina was happy to go. Not quite the same reaction, coming to California in the middle of Christina's senior year, or before her senior year. But she was very much behind it, as not enthusiastic, but hey, Dad, whatever we need to do. You mentioned a few of them. I think Karen and I have been married 28 years, and I think we've had about 10 moves in 28 years. So, and I know some of these people have heard me say this, but it's absolutely true. In the world of coaching, talking about coaches' wives, there's only two types. There's great wives and ex-wives. And luckily I have the former, so make sure Karen knows I did say that again today.
I think there's video evidence back there. Well, and you mentioned that, and I know we're bouncing around a little bit, but since Kara's not here, you can say all kinds of stuff about her. But maybe you can share with folks what the secret to that relationship you guys have is. Because I've watched you, and you guys seem to be such good friends that I've never seen a cross look from her. She's always smiling at you.
You don't see her all the time.
Yeah. But to me, it seems like your family really is close. It's not just a show, that there is a friendship and a common bond there. Where did that originate from, and what do you credit for the longevity of your marriage and the way your family is?
Well, I'll tell you, Kara and I have known each other. I mean, we kid about it, that her parents, Jim and Nancy, and my mom and dad were great friends growing up. So we kid that it was an arranged marriage. I've known her since, I think, 3rd grade. In fact, we would have holidays together, and then right around 8th grade or so, I started thinking, you know, she's kind of cute. And we dated through high school, and then when I went off to the academy, we decided that, hey, if it's meant to be, it'll work out, that we need to date other people too, because I didn't want to have one of these 6-month Dear John letters coming in that she decided on her own. So I decided I'm going to make this decision that we're both going to do it. But I think the biggest thing is that we had parents that were committed, that had ups and downs, and we saw that, you know, marriage is not always easy, in that if you work through those tough times, it's going to be worth it. And we've had great times. You know, the last 3 years here in Fresno have been fantastic. We've had some tough times. And, you know, to have a partner like Kara who's been by my side, absolutely has given me the strength to stay in this business, because it's going to be a tough business. But she's a terrific coach's wife. She's always anxious to, you know, get involved in a community wherever we go. She ends up having to be the mother and the father a lot of the times. I'm the dad for 105 players, and she ends up being the mom and dad for 2 of our kids, unfortunately. But she's understood that role and has embraced it. And you know, I love her with all my heart, and thank the Lord that you know, He brought her into my life.
And you know, you say that she has to be the dad for the 2 of them, but I've seen the way your kids interact with you, and she must be doing something that is not brewing resentment there and saying, hey, I'm your mom and your dad. Obviously, she is supporting you in a way, and your relationship with your kids is such that they really respect you and admire you. I mean, I see your daughter around you, and you're her hero. I mean, she is following you around with a sparkle in her eye. Maybe for some of the dads out here who I'm sure have difficult jobs as well, how have you kind of, when you're busy and when you're everywhere and you're being a dad to these 105 players, as you say, made sure to maintain those relationships and strengthen them?
Well, you know, what we try to do everywhere we've been is, you know, because you're gone, try to make special occasions for your kids and make them feel like they are special. It's not always easy. You know, when we started up in August, that first week of August, we're working Monday through Sunday until basically signing day in February. And then I come back home in what we call the re-entry phase. And especially when the kids were around, Garrett wasn't, you know, real fired up that first week when I was home, because I'd say, hey, wait a minute, why aren't their toys put away, or what? And she says, you know what, for the last 6 months, things have worked pretty well, so just, if you're going to be around here, this is how it's going to be. And so I kind of let go some things that maybe got on my nerves, but the big thing we would try to do, and I was fortunate that I worked for some coaches, Jim Grove and you know, Juan, Troy Calhoun, that when our kids were playing sports, even during the season, if we could be there, if I wasn't on the road, I was able to go and let them know that they too were important, and that when we had our games, you know, I wanted them to come to our practices, come to our games, and be a part of it as much as they can. And they just felt like, you know, hey, Dad cares about me too.
And I see that throughout your coaching staff, that you help create that space for your assistants, and that you guys as a staff really are a family. And you know, I'm not trying to butter you up here and make a big deal out of it, but I think it is important to note there are a lot of people in the coaching profession. I mean, I think famously when Jimmy Johnson got hired by Jerry Jones for the Cowboys, that he actually had the quote a couple of years after that the first thing he did was got a divorce. He knew he had to be married to the Dallas Cowboys. He actually said that. And, you know, maybe some guys aren't as brutally honest to say that, but that's what ends up happening. And it seems to me that you've made a conscious decision in your own life and with your assistants to maintain that balance. And how do you see that playing out on your staff with the other guys that you've brought in?
Well, again, you know, we're all creatures of our environment, and I was very, very fortunate to be around Fisher DeBerry, and family was extremely important to him. And so that model is kind of what we try to do here. During the season, again, we're working Sunday through Sunday, and on Sunday nights, whether we win or lose, we'll be in. I tell our staff, I don't want anybody in before noon. If you want to go to church, great. If you don't, that's your deal. But don't make one side of the ball come in on Sunday morning. That's your time. And then at 5 o'clock is family time. We don't have time to go home, get dinner, and come back. So we'll have all of our families come in, and we'll spend an hour just with our families. And again, letting them know that they're important and giving our guys a chance to have a little bit of reality time with their families before we go back to work. And we're usually there till, 11 or so at night, and then we're back at 5:30 the next morning. But those are the kind of things that I think are very, very important. I think our staff appreciates that. Again, whenever anybody on our staff says, "Hey, Coach, my son's playing this game," or "My daughter's got this going on," it's absolutely go. There's never something so critical. Now, obviously, if we're on the road, if you're not around, you can't do it. But when we're around, we will make the time so that those guys can go see their kids play, because those things are critical.
Yeah, and one of the ways I saw you live that out was your first year here. Maybe it's your second year here. Let's see. Well, no, your first year here. You've got a certain quarterback who was pretty good. You had some pretty important games that you guys were going to be facing. And then he had some stuff in his life where he needed a timeout, and you gave him the space to do that. But I wanted to ask you about that with Derek Carr, because I know that you're a smart guy, and you interviewed for some other coaching jobs, and there was a reason that you wanted the Fresno State job. You believed there was potential in this community and in that program. But did you know how special a player you were getting in Derek Carr?
I don't think anybody knew. I knew from that first day that there was something special about him. When I came and talked to the team for the first time, I knew I was talking to a group of guys that were very, very hurt. The guy that had recruited them, that had convinced them of the vision of Fresno, had just been let go. And a lot of times new coach comes in, especially one that they don't know anything about, and they love their old coach. They looked at me like I was new dad. And Mom and Dad got divorced, and we like old dad. I don't want new dad. But Derek came up to me afterwards and said, "Coach, I know we don't know each other, but we're going to make this thing work. And if anything goes wrong, or is there any dissension with our team, I'll get it snuffed out." I thought, this guy's pretty special, because he was just a sophomore at that point. And he and Robbie Rouse both stuck around and just said, "Coach, we're behind you. We're going to get this thing going." But you talk about a special individual that is grounded off the field, and more importantly than he is on the field. And it wasn't always that way. Most people here probably know a lot of Derek's story, that like a typical kid, had some wayward times, but he is as grounded and as mature of a young man as I think I've ever been around. I've been around some pretty impressive young guys, but he is definitely just special.
Well, I think we're about out of time on that, but Coach, I know a lot of these folks in here are going to be praying for you, not just during the season, but in the off season as well. And what you said earlier about athletics being the front door to a university, in our case here in the San Joaquin Valley, in so many ways, Fresno State athletics, and in particular on national TV almost every week, Fresno State football really does reflect a lot of us here and reflect our community. So for all of you, remember that this year, and lift up Coach in prayer, because we know he's going to be going through some battles, and we know that he's going to represent us very well. Thanks for sharing a little bit of your story with us today, and we'll do it again sometime.